If you've ever wanted to take a deep dive into the connections between politics, wealth, and corruption, then this is the podcast for you. In the first part, I'll talk about the more political side of the issues, and in the second part, I'll talk about the more human aspect in a more creative way. The reason I decided to do this is because I've always been very interested in economics and politics, and I always kind of wondered what it would be like to be in a position where you have so much money and so much influence, and I've always just kind of wondered what I would do in that situation. At first, I was going to look into the more political side of evil, and I wanted to see how politics influenced evil, how evil influenced politics, how people got into politics, if there was a dark system there. But eventually I realized that most of it just boiled down to money. You can really buy your way into things like politics with money. In 2019, 2020, we saw Michael Bloomberg buy his way into the Democratic primary with basically just money. Obviously he had some support, but in reality, him being a billionaire was the biggest advantage that he had. And so my inquiry question was, how does our economic system influence evil? Specifically the one that we're using in the West, capitalism. And I kind of wanted to compare it to, communism, liberalism, very far right, economic capitalism, very free market, and kind of just look at the pros and cons. And I really do try and stay unbiased, but because this is such a partisan issue that people have such strong feelings about, it's very hard for me to not let my personal bias seep into the product. But I'm hoping that when you watch it, you won't think, oh, this guy, he's such a radical, he's really out there. I'm hoping that it'll just be a nice listen where I stay unbiased. Overall, this podcast is just going to be about the ways that corruption and wealth can infiltrate our political system, and also what you as a person can do about it, because this is often an issue that makes us feel helpless. It makes us feel like, oh, it's just some rich guys in a boardroom in New York talking it over, and what can I really do? And to an extent that's true, but there's also a lot of power that the individual has, because the whole thing about the 1% is that they're only 1% of the population. You have some power, right? You're part of the 99%. We have democracy here, so, you got power from that. And, yeah, I'll talk about that more at the end. Hope you guys enjoy. Everyone hears about the secretive, mystical elite as a kid. We often think about them as people far away in some secret boardroom or on Wall Street, conspiring to make and use their money to gain power and influence. Surprisingly, these people are realer and closer than you might think. Some might say that it is a personal fault of character that leads to the evil these people influence. However, at some level, isn't it the fault of our economic system for creating and allowing those corrupted by wealth and power to exist? Does capitalism, the traditional Western economic system, create or prevent evil?
Capitalism and communism both are flawed.
I think it depends on the corporation, and I think, yes, that freedom is important, but there are also some companies and organizations which have to be controlled just to keep them in line.
We only have one Earth, and we should probably take good care of it.
Let's take a look at how our current system works, and in some ways doesn't. It is no secret that some jobs pay more than others, and that some of the highest paying jobs are for big corporations, such as CEOs, financial experts, and lawyers. Others are in fields that take immense schooling, such as doctors. But the discrepancy between the very rich and the very poor is getting greater every second. It is believed by some that a strong middle class is vital for a prosperous economy, but as more and more people slip into poverty, and the top 1% own more of the Earth's wealth, the opposite appears to be happening.
Financial professionals and managers made up 14% of the top 1% in 2005, up from 8% in 1979, and while top financial executives earn the same as their peers in other industries in 1980, they were making a 250% premium by 2006.
We may find the notion that almost all of our federal representatives are more wealthy than we are unsurprising. The fact that the average American congressperson is a millionaire, while their constituents largely struggle to make ends meet, should be alarming. How can we expect our leaders to represent the will of the people if their campaigns are paid for by private interests seeking to make more money and gain power off of the votes of the congressperson they fund? Even more ludicrously, those congresspeople are well within the right to have worked or work for those same special interests when they leave office. In my opinion, this is not a characteristic of a truly fair and free democracy.
As Plato and Aristotle noted, the overwhelming majority of people who made up the Athenian demos were not wealthy. Rule of the people, they observed, by definition means rule of the poor, since citizens of modest means are bound to vastly outnumber the rich.
Just because the people of power and wealth have the ability to use their power for devious reasons, doesn't mean we have to let them. British Columbia's NDP government passed legislation to limit campaign fundraising donations from individuals, corporations, and unions with large sums of money, effectively limiting their influence.
The NDP's 2017 rules banned corporate and union donations and limited individual donations up to $1,200, but the prohibitions didn't kick in until a month before the election. That allowed developer Peter Wall to spend $80,000 on billboards to promote one Vancouver mayoral candidate up to 29 days before the election, without any requirement or to report or limit the spending.
These 2017 rules left giant loopholes that the new campaign financing rules seek to fix. For example, several attack ads were run on social media platforms without disclosure on who was paying for them. These ads could have easily been paid for by people with devious interests or with laundered money, and there's no way of tracking it.
Under the proposed changes, Ms. Osborne said Elections BC will be given more power to investigate, including the authority to get information from banks and social media companies about party and finances or individuals who are paying for various forms of advertising.
The new measures don't come into effect until 2022, and even then, some worry that not enough is being done to prevent suspicious funds from infiltrating our election. However, it seems to be a step in the right direction. Vancouver Green Party councillor Pete Fry explained.
This should mean that a lot of funds that are currently claimed as operational expenses, like non-election year digital marketing and communications, will no longer be exempt from declaration and public scrutiny. This really helps to daylight some of the dark money that continues to infiltrate and influence our political systems.
It is still up in the air whether the unlawful use of funds in elections is a direct result of the capitalist economic system, but it is definite that if no individual or organization had exorbitant amounts of money, then it wouldn't be an issue in the first place. It is a pretty popular idea that everyone should have a voice, rich or not. So the idea that whoever has the most money gets to advertise the most seems counterproductive at best and unlawful at worst. Just because we have the ability to make positive change doesn't mean we will, and as those with wealth continue to grow in influence, we may be unable to even pass legislation like this in the future. It is no secret that capitalist systems are often corrupted by wealth, but is there a better alternative?
Capitalism does seem to have less flaws than communism.
I think communism was better in concept, but capitalism works way better and just is more effective.
Trickle-down economics theory doesn't work.
Free market capitalism, low tax, and low regulation are the generally accepted conservative economic values. They argue that capitalism is failing because taxes are too high and the government is too involved, or that capitalism isn't failing at all. This is a weird notion, however, as the only way capitalism is not on a downward trend is if your objective is to have the richest 1% gain money as the rest do not. Regulation is a conservative talking point for free market capitalism, often attacks government control of industry and land.
In the nation's big coastal cities, increasingly restrictive zoning has levied an ever more burdensome tax on new housing construction. While boosting real estate values for lucky legacy homeowners, zoning has imposed a serious drag on national economic output as much as 10% according to recent estimates.
Licenses for jobs can also be considered an unnecessary bottleneck that inhibits the ebb and flow of capitalism.
In 1970, only 1 in 10 Americans worked in a job subject to mandatory government licensing. Now it's closer to 1 in 3. Most of that growth has occurred because of a huge expansion in the number of licensed occupations, now over 1,100 and counting.
The argument against this philosophy is often that businesses are not asking for less regulation, and are happy to pay taxes that will ensure them essentials such as Medicare.
Too often, conservatives' idea of a pro-growth policy agenda starts at the end with tax cuts. Despite the overwhelming evidence that moderate increases or decreases in the top rate have little effect on growth, when conservatives do turn their attention to regulation, they usually think about providing regulatory relief for business by lightening health, safety, environmental, and labor regulations.
On the other hand, we have liberal and socialist economic beliefs, which prioritize regulation, welfare, and keeping the wealthy in check, such as by taxing. This can be seen as hypocritical though, as many proponents on high wealth tax rates are millionaires themselves.
Close the gulf between rich and poor. strengthen and protect workers' rights and labor unions, adopt a job guarantee as part of the Green New Deal, raise the minimum wage to a living wage, and adopt a maximum wage that caps individual after-tax income.
The logic for this thinking is that as money drives corporations, it is the government's job to step in and set healthy regulation to stimulate the economy and keep a level playing field. This train of thought also says that it is the duty of government to redistribute the funds of the extremely wealthy between disadvantaged citizens and government programs, with the slogan "Abolish Billionaires" becoming popular within the North American socialist movements.
We won't solve the climate crisis, for example, until and unless we can agree to leave the great forests standing. But if your competitors won't stop cutting down trees, you too may have to cut them down to survive.
This being said, the more extreme end of the socialist ideology proposes that the government should control all businesses for the good of the worker, and a free trade economy is abolished. This can be greatly problematic and is largely untested, with most communist nations being mere authoritarian regimes. Some have even suggested that the government is too slow and insufficiently far-reaching, and have proposed that industries self-regulate in order to fight the climate crisis. This is a bold idea, as it implies that the rich are choosing to give up potential profit and power for the mutual bettering of society. But after all, what is the point of a product or service if there is no one to sell it to?
Industry-wide cooperation or self-regulation is one potential solution. This isn't an entirely crazy idea. Many of the central institutions of the 19th century American economy, including the New York Stock Exchange and the Chicago Board of Trade, were voluntary associations formed to address the public goods problems thrown up by the maturing U.S. economy.
All of these potential solutions to the political and social gridlock that keeps the economy riddled with problems have some virtue, and all have obvious flaws. Conservative capitalism leaves the poor and our environment unprotected. Liberalism is slow and requires corporations and individuals to fill in the holes of government and promises things it is not bold enough to provide. Democratic socialism is scary and unprecedented, with a tendency to devolve into terror and dictatorship. The one thing they all have in common is that they, at least in theory, seek to benefit the majority and disadvantage as few people as possible, which is the opposite of what is currently taking place in North America. If the wealthy are allowed to continue to hold influence in our government, and profits are put over the health of our people and planet, the stability and prosperity of our earth will surely dwindle. There is no doubt that capitalism is corrupted by wealth and greed, but there's also no doubt that there is a change we can make to steer ourselves out of darkness. The problem now is, which one do we pick? Every system has some pros and cons, but what we decide to do to better our world is up to you.
Global warming and stuff? It's not very pog.
With so many opinions in the financial markets, take a moment to consider the simple choice this winter. Make smart investments. The numbers speak for themselves. Capital Direct investors have seen returns of over 7% for almost a decade. And it's all based on lending to Canadian homeowners secured on real estate. Now that's a smart investment. If you'd like to invest along with me, call us today or speak to your financial advisor.
We hear a lot of great things about Capital Direct and home equity loans. Let's hear from a recent customer. Tell me a bit about you.
So, I have a job at a convenience store, and with the pandemic, I need some extra money to pay groceries, so I took a loan out from you guys, but the interest was so high that me and my family almost starved.
And that was a good experience.
No, it was really terrible. Yeah, it really sucked. Didn't like it.
But it's worked out well for you.
No, not at all.
CapitalDirect.ca.
And now, a short story about the corrupting power of wealth. Fresh out of the lottery center with a $15,000 charity raffle check, Xander stepped into the bank anxiously, excited to finally be able to gain access to his winnings. In only minutes, Xander would be able to cash his check and gain access to the money he so deserved. His eyes shot down to his watch, which appeared to be at least 2 hours off already. He had just set it that morning.
Useless.
He groaned, taking it off and putting it in his jacket pocket. The bank clerk peered over at Xander, putting down a sandwich.
I can ring you up now, son.
No attention was paid to this, as Xander's eyes darted to the gloriously fresh stack of cash that he had requested, along with the money he deposited directly into his bank account. Xander thought that this would make him a happy man for months.
Good luck, son.
The clerk said in a sympathetic yet gruff voice.
It sure was,
Replied Xander ecstatically, making room in his jacket pocket. He then moved the worn-out watch to his back pocket, out of sight. Xander exited the bank with considerably more swagger than he had entered with, spotting a homeless man on the street as he stepped into the fresh air. In a moment of complete euphoria, he handed the skeletal man a $100 bill. and took off before he could even receive thanks. Xander, blackout drunk on power, swiftly entered a nearby jewelry store. The inside was ornate with flowing architecture, if not a bit tacky. He quickly decided on a $3,000 used Rolex. A small luxury, Xander reasoned. For money he had won supporting a good cause. It was only right for some money to be spent on himself, as Xander was from more modest means than most who entered the Children's Hospital lottery.
This is a nice piece.
Said the jewelry salesman, a sly look on his face.
Enjoy it.
I will.
Affirmed Xander.
It's a lot better than what I had before.
As Xander put the watch on, he felt a sudden weight in his chest, as if the soul of his previous owner had found a vessel. Despite this, Xander felt like a modern-day king. He thought about the cold metal pressed up against his back pocket, and how far removed he felt from his past self, even 20 minutes back. Eventually, Xander decided to treat his roommate to a nice lunch, and in no time, Jamie was at the Lakeside, the restaurant known for its ridiculous prices and charming owner.
Jeez, nice rollie,
Jamie exclaimed, sitting down next to Xander, who already had an umbrella-laden Coke in front of him.
Thanks,
replied Xander, with a whiff of superiority.
Glad you came. Wouldn't want to spend all my winnings on myself.
The roommates talked as though nothing had changed since Xander had left in the morning, although the food was significantly better than the usual sandwiches, and Xander paid the bill for the both of them. As they left the establishment and walked down the row of palms to Jamie's car, Jamie cleared his throat.
Hey, I was, wondering if you would be able to lend me a couple grand to help with my share of the apartment, now that you've got a little extra cash.
This statement hit Xander like a bullet. It became cloudily clear to him that Jamie was not the friend he had thought he was, and that refusing to help was imminent, even though he would have to break the news lightly. He felt illuminated by the cash pressing up against his pockets, blocking the cold metal of his old watch from bothering him, although pieces of doubt still remained in the alleyways of his consciousness. Although Jamie had been hard hit by the closing of the local mechanics, that was no excuse to mooch off a friend's hard-earned money.
I just treated you to a fantastic lunch, and you can't even thank me before asking for more money.
Xander was raising his voice, becoming increasingly high-pitched with paranoia.
You think you know someone, and they turn on you like that as soon as you have some fortune.
Xander snapped his fingers to illustrate his point. Jamie couldn't help but let out an angry laugh before walking away to his car.
I'm really sorry, but I just don't see another way. I guess I'll have to find a cheaper place to live then,
he said, before leaving Xander alone with his thoughts in the dusty lot. Xander forgot any of these feelings or remorse, however, with the purchase of a beautiful home ice cream maker. Within a couple days, Xander's funds had dried up like a watering hole. Jamie had been nowhere to be seen, even though most of his stuff was still left untouched, like the house was a historical museum. With every dollar spent, the sound of Jamie's piercing laugh came closer to breaching the barricade between Xander's ears and brain. He sat down on the remarkably hard sofa and felt his watch press against his back pocket once again, piercing him like a needle of truth. His apartment was dirty as always, but with random knickknacks of little actual value strewn about the small apartment, which wasn't built with countertop space in mind. The ice cream maker whirred. Xander felt content, but less happy by the hour. The appeal of spending his last $100 he had won was low, yet he decided he might as well do something worthwhile with it. That's what good people did, he reasoned. Xander walked along the city pond, admiring the majesty of the ducks. He saw a small duckling waddle out of a bush and into the water where it met its mother, and felt great grief, although he did not know why. Before he knew it, Xander was back on the very same street he had withdrawn his winnings, his watch glittering in the morning sun. The shopkeepers all seemed to frown at him as he walked past, frowning before turning away. The guilt built up until it could no longer be ignored, and he gave his last $100 to the sleeping homeless man, who seemed just as thin as before, and even dirtier. Xander felt he had finally figured out what he had to do, as he walked at great pace a few blocks back. Xander sheepishly walked into the very same jewelry store he had purchased his Rolex in, and noted that the ornate decoration seemed far more artificial than even 2 days ago.
A refund, I see,
said the man at the counter, his sly smile becoming increasingly pronounced. Xander felt a great relief when he took the watch off, feeling at least 4 watches later, although he had only taken off 1. Xander exited the shop, and with hesitation picked up his cheap cell phone. He hadn't bothered to get a new one. Jamie answered the call at the last possible second, the ringtone coming to a crescendo.
Hi.
His voice sounded strained.
Hey,
said Xander awkwardly.
I just wanted to apologize.
Jamie let out a signature laugh, and Xander took comfort in letting the distinct sound pierce his mind. Xander and Jamie were together at the old sandwich shop where they usually spent a lazy Sunday afternoon talking among themselves or to the owner.
I'll happily cover your rent for a few weeks until you can find a new job.
I appreciate that, but don't worry about it,
responded Jamie knowingly.
I insist.
Xander beamed. Things faded back into normalcy as Xander slipped his tattered old watch onto his wrist. The bank clerk walked into lunch, nodding knowingly at Xander as he entered. In an instant, Xander finally understood why the bank clerk had meant only a few days ago. So, just to conclude this all out, I'm going to be talking a little bit about my thinking process, my research process, how I came to create what I created, my ideas going into it, some new perspectives that I've gotten, and also kind of the bright side and what we can all do to solve the issues that I described. So one of the most important things is that I learned a lot through this process, both about the topic that I made my podcast about and also the production of the podcast, how to make it compelling or try to do so, how to play with music, how to play with levels of sound, and just try and create a dynamic and interesting experience. It was really difficult to narrow down all the aspects of my project into something palatable, and I read so many accounts and perspectives related to economics, capitalism, politics, that it really broadened my knowledge of the topic. And even if I didn't specifically include those texts in my project, I still wanted to have them in my consciousness and try and use everything there to create a really unbiased product. Overall, what I looked into is just such a broad issue that if I had a year to look into it, I could make hours and hours of podcast. But I think the important thing that really matters is that we are forever willing to keep our minds malleable and open-minded, and we're always willing to take in new information because things will change over time. Our understandings of these things will change over time. I kind of went into this project with a tunnel vision on the solutions that I prefer, but taking a step back from all that to really gain a newfound perspective and not stay so focused on what I believed and instead look at all the possible solutions was pretty valuable. And in the end, all systems have pros and cons. Even if you're really in favor of one system, you gotta admit that there's gonna be some flaws, and kind of taking ideas from every single side of an issue is really the way that you make substantial progress that doesn't just get reversed as soon as someone else comes up with a different idea. A very uplifting thing that I managed to learn about was those kind of shining stars in the night sky, the people that are actually fighting to better our world, and even if we agree with them or disagree with them, if they're trying to solve things with an honest and sincere attitude, then I think it's really beneficial to society as a whole, and I think those are the kind of people that we can aspire to be. What you can do personally, if you really want to fight for an issue, the most important thing you can do is stay informed, stay up to date, stay involved, and use your voice. If you have the ability to vote, do it, because that is really the thing that drives change. You are 1/30 millionth if you live in Canada, 1/300 millionth if you live in the US, of the country's voice. So, as much as it takes millions of others, you alone still have a voice, and it's still important. In my view, voting, sharing your opinions, having discourse is kind of the most important thing you can do in your everyday life. Most people, they're not going to get added to history books. They're not going to get awarded a Nobel Prize. And so just simply doing their best to make positive change to society in a very simple and easy way like voting is the best they can do. I truly believe that if we fight together, we can fix our world, our economy, our society, and even with the advent of things like machine learning and automation, it's still doable, but the actual doing part is up to everybody. No one person can really do it. And when it comes down to it, this is your country, this is your world just as much as anyone else's. So in a way, it's your birthright, it's your duty to kind of fight for it and to try your honest best to see the world that you want to see. In the end, change is up to you.